man, from my highly sophisticated broadcast center. Like that? It works. It works. Yeah, I know. The tripod stand was a ripoff, man. I'm sure we could do better than this. There's got to be a way to do better than this. Every week I leave and I say I'm going to have somebody come in and man this so people could like send in questions. Every week I tell myself. And every week I don't do it. So we'll wait about another minute, guys, and see who else is coming in, then we'll get started. So you can keep talking. Do your thing. Now I'm gonna grab something. What's the big idea? Carol Kane, can you get a sign-in sheet?
There's one going around.
Oh, well there you go. Well done, Carol. What's the problem here? So you've got a sign-in sheet going around, guys. You've got, we're looking for name and phone number and email. If you're not comfortable with that, that's fine too. It's not required. We like to try to keep in contact with folks, and that's one of the ways. And Favor's interesting. I spent my whole first part of my career kind of working in traditional clinical settings, started a bunch of rehabs and community mental health, that kind of thing, and everything involved a 17-page assessment process. So we don't want to be like that here. But we would like to have your name and phone number. If you're not down with it, don't worry about it. Or if you want to make up a fake name and a fake phone number. If you want to put your neighbor's name and phone number down, do what you got to do, man. So just to make sure everybody's in the right place, this is Favor's Monday Night Family Group. We're going to talk tonight about different issues related to substance use disorder, mental health, whatever might come up. I'm going to go through some stuff. I have some ideas and issues that I like to talk about. I spent the week last week, the latter part of the week, doing a bunch of trainings around family recovery, and the universal struggle with this issue and how difficult it is to kind of be a parent or a spouse, but mainly I've been dealing with parents kind of going through this and worry, wonder what's going on with your kid, worry about your kid, what's going to happen next, when is this ever going to end, when am I ever going to be able to take a breath? It is a very, very uniquely difficult kind of situation to deal with. And I was thinking about, if you guys know my story at all, you know anything about what I went through this summer with my son. This is him right here. This is what it looks like when you set boundaries. Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about how it's impossible to set boundaries without making somebody angry, all right? Whether they're 6 years old or 26 years old. When you tell people no, they don't like it. And but my son Aiden wound up having like a respiratory failure kind of situation. I don't even really hard to explain how or why this even happened, but he was hospitalized. It was intensive care. He was in a drug-induced coma for 4 days while this was getting worked out, and they were saying, we don't know what it is. And it was terribly traumatic. I had to drive from South Carolina because I got the call at it happened in Pittsburgh, and I got the call at 11:30 at night. You couldn't get a flight. So I just drove, straight through. And it was awful. It was, hands down one of the worst days of my life. But here's the thing about that. It was there, he was there, and it ended, right? And it was over. And then, we were going to a lot of appointments, and it was very, very anxiety-producing after that, but there was a sense of control and a sense of having a plan. I compare that with some of the stuff I've dealt with my kids around substances or other related issues, and it's never ending. It's just, okay, we took care of it for today, but what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next week? When are we ever out of the woods? How do we even know whether we have the plan? So I think that it's a healthcare issue, and it's a difficult to deal with healthcare issue, but it's uniquely difficult because of the way it never ends, or how easy it would be to tell yourself it's never going to end. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so how do you go from crisis to crisis, or from situation to situation? Whereas I went through it once, how do you do it if you have to do it every 30 days or every other day for that matter? And I feel like that's where it becomes really, really important that you try to find ways to deal with that yourself, and you try to find ways to be okay no matter what's going on with your loved one, even though that's counterintuitive, even though that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to talk through a little bit of those principles tonight, try to give you some ideas related to that. The first thing I would tell you is, when we went to my son, when I went through some stuff with my son, he's doing okay now, and he was at the University of Pittsburgh and going berserkers. That's what you do when you're Jones and you go to the University of Pittsburgh. You go berserkers, and so we do what you do. You overreact. We pull him out of school, all that kind of good stuff. And I remember going to an Al-Anon meeting, and I have nothing against Al-Anon. I love Al-Anon, but I remember them saying things like, "You're sick too, and you need to work on yourself." And I remember being completely rejecting that out of hand in my head. Now, I've come to understand that there's wisdom in that statement, but I didn't come to understand it until time went by. The wisdom in that statement, which doesn't get said, is as you take care of yourself, meaning you learn how to manage your boundaries, you learn how to manage your own stress level, you literally increase the likelihood that your loved one is going to find recovery. So by taking care of yourself, you actually are taking care of your loved one. That's the great paradox. That's the things that's something that people don't believe a lot of times when I say it. But it falls into this counseling theory, or this approach, guys. It's called systems theory, which goes like this: that if you move one part of the family, you move the whole entire family. And it's tried and true, and it's used in a lot of different ways. And so when we talk tonight about taking care of yourself, and I throw suggestions out there, it's not just, obviously it's for you and for your health and for your welfare, but also it increases the likelihood that your loved one's going to start to move in a different direction. It's a fact. So I want to try to sell you on that idea, but I want you to understand that there's two benefits. Your head won't explode, and it'll increase the likelihood that your loved one will move toward recovery without any guarantees. You guys get that? And you guys have to try to, like, if you don't believe it, just buy into it a little bit and hear me out through the course of the evening. I was going to talk about boundaries. I was going to go through some of this stuff, but I also like to open it up to the group and see if anybody's dealing with anything specific that they have a question about. Sometimes people will walk in here with a very specific question or situation, and I'm willing to kind of put this on hold and make sure you get the answers that you need. Anybody got anything that they want to talk about? Yes?
Post-acute withdrawal and how long it can last.
Okay, we'll talk about that. I will absolutely talk about that. Yes?
You quickly mentioned overreacting, pulling them out of school, this, that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a really, so we'll talk about post-acute withdrawal and then also this idea of overreacting. And maybe overreacting is the wrong way for me to say that. Reacting quickly, reacting from a place of emotion rather than a place of rationale. And if I could do that over, I wouldn't do that again, not at all. Like the punishment, and it really wasn't punishment, the action did not fit the crime, so to speak. What was I driven by? I was driven by fear. I was driven by worst case scenario thinking. You guys know what I mean by that? It was like 0 to 60. There was nothing in between. And that led to that decision. And I'm going to, how do you step back and use the rational part of your brain whenever you're fearful for your kid's life? So overreacting isn't the best word, but I'll talk about that. Yes, Karen?
First of all, I'd just like to commend you on a couple of the people that work here. We had a situation yesterday, and Hubert and Phil both took, I said I need 5 minutes, and that really was all I needed. But it was just wonderful. And
Good.
then I just want to see if you could go over, when do they switch when you're in recovery from this me, it's all about me, my recovery, my.
When does it change?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It's longer than 19 years. I have 19 years. No, I'm just kidding. No, so how long does it take? Yes, I do know. Thank you. Thank you for editing that. So, no, it's a great question. So when does a person move from this kind of self-centered sort of it's all about me and all about what I need, and that also continues in recovery without question? I think that's a really, really hard question to answer. A couple things I would say about it. Don't forget, depending on how old your child is or your loved one that you're dealing with, there's also just a real self-centered aspect to being a teenager and young adult. That is a fact of life with or without drugs. And it's 16 to 25 or 15 to 23, like whatever that age range is, your brain is still developing, and so you are literally by definition, normal development is to be very self-centered and very focused. As far as recovery goes, nobody has a definite answer to that. It's really hard for anyone to say. People have different markers where they feel like the brain recovers and they feel like they learn a lot. You hear people talk about a year, you go through all the seasons, you go through all the holidays, you go through all these different events, and you gain a perspective. So people will hang their hat on a year. What I believe is very individualized. I mean, I've seen people be a lot better at 90 days. I've seen people go 5 years and still remain that way. There are people who that is who they are. Does that make sense? And I'm not at all saying that's the case for anyone's loved one in here, but you'll hear people talk about narcissism, and you'll hear people say that addicts and alcoholics are narcissistic. This is the thing that gets thrown around. Here's what we know about that. The general population lifetime prevalence of narcissism will be about 6%. 6 to 7%. Among those of us who are addicted, it's about 14 to 15%. So it is about 2 times more likely, but it's still very unlikely that they're narcissistic. Do you get that? Like it is more often than the general population, but it's still 85% of us are not narcissistic. All these things come into factors, though, when you're trying to figure out when are they going to start looking at what they did? When are they going to start taking responsibility for their actions? Programs have it built in where that's part of the process. The 12-step programs have a major part of that is taking responsibility. If you go see a therapist, you go see a counselor or a coach, they're going to talk to you about taking responsibility. We see it as exceedingly important in your recovery. The problem is, especially with younger people, it's just how do you define taking responsibility? How do you define not being self-centered? Do they, even under the best of conditions, understand that concept. I've said this in here before, excuse my language, but when my daughter turned 16, it was like the asshole fairy came in the room and sprinkled dust on her, right? And stayed that way. That's an awesome thing to say. I know you guys don't want to laugh, but you know, what is that? That is literally, that's how we are designed as human beings. It's a way to like increase the likelihood of independence. It got you out of the cave back in the day. You started to take chances. You started to push your luck. You started to feel like you were invincible. How many people know a teenager or a young adult that is invincible in every kind of way? Whether it's using substances or driving 150 miles per hour or jumping off of high cliffs into shallow bodies of water. It's not going to happen to me. So what I would encourage everyone to do would be to look at the situation through two different lenses. One is what's going down from a substance use perspective. I'm going to show you some pictures of the brain. I'm going to talk about how long does it take for the brain to come back online. That's definitely part of it. The second part of it would be, though, what's appropriate for their age, what's appropriate for their situation. And don't discount that part of the equation as well. It's going to be hard to not discount that part of the equation, guys, because remember, you're going to be very, very tuned into things. And have you ever heard the terminology addictive thinking? So there really is no such thing as addictive thinking. It's just human thinking. It's just where addiction is concerned, that tends to be where it plays itself out, right? It plays itself out with substances. But think about it for a minute. Everybody in this room, I mean, we've done this little exercise before. You don't have to like say anything, but how many times have you known the right thing to do and done the wrong thing anyway? That is not addictive thinking. That's being a human being. And if you're sitting there saying that you never did that, I have a diagnosis for you. We can talk real quick after group. I'll kind of like push you through that process. And don't ever, I understand why you would get really, really concerned, right? Because the stakes are so high, but don't ever, I guess this goes back to that term overreact, which is a horrible way to say it. Make sure you're reacting from a place of kind of the facts and as rationally as possible. Yeah, and give yourself a break because it's nothing easy about that. There's nothing easy at all about that. But especially, I just happen to know you're dealing with a young person. And so a lot of the stuff that she has going on may be young person stuff. Yep. Post-acute withdrawal. So post-acute withdrawal is a process. When you look at like acute withdrawal is when we're putting this substance in our system. Okay, let's pretend it's opioids. Part of my story is pain pills. So I'm addicted to pain pills, and when I didn't have these substances, I got sick. And it would usually last about 3 to 5 days. That's called acute withdrawal. You can't sleep at night. You feel like your skin is crawling, your legs ache, your nose runs. It's like the flu on steroids, kind of. That lasts about 3 to 5 days. Post-acute withdrawal is an ongoing feeling of inability to concentrate, irritability, some difficulty sleeping, and that can last up to a year. Depending on the substance, sometimes some people will say it can last up to 18 months, but it gets progressively better as time goes by. All right, so I'm going to jump into this boundaries thing and talk a little bit about my story real quick and why I'm passionate about family recovery and some of the stuff that I've experienced along the way. I grew up in a home, substances were present, it kind of defined my life. I've shared my story growing up before, but you really don't know it. It's 1970s, 1980s. You don't talk about these issues back then. It's just never brought up. The word alcoholic and addict is kind of like, you talk about stigma magnified back in the day, right? Going through that, doing what I'm doing, and then I picked up my first substance around the age of 14. It was alcohol. I didn't fall in love with it right away, but it progresses over time, and it was kind of like boys will be boys, work hard, play hard sort of mentality. High functioning alcoholism. Anybody ever hear that term? What that means is you have a job. And so I had a job, and I did pretty well in the job, and it allowed me to continue doing what I was doing. Then I was in a car accident, and I wound up getting prescribed. I walked out of the emergency room with 120 Darvocet. This is in Western Pennsylvania, 1999, right at the beginning of the period of time when doctors were told don't let anybody feel pain. And that spun out of control really, really quickly, probably within 18 months to 2 years. I mean, just 100% out of control, constantly in withdrawal, constantly seeking these substances, going bankrupt from spending all this money on these prescriptions, doctor shopping all over the place, just 100% out of control. And my family was the closest to me and really the only people who knew this was going on. And this is why I like to talk about family recovery and why it's important for you guys to be here tonight. My coworkers didn't know. I didn't have any legal issues. You know, the legal system wasn't involved. I didn't have any health care issues other than what I was going to the doctor to get these meds for. And so nobody knew what was going down except my mom and my wife, okay? And my kids, but my kids were very, very young. I kept it from my brothers. I kept it from everybody because that's what, sometimes we're pretty good at that. Sometimes we can kind of put it in a box. And so here's a picture of me and my wife. This is today after she no longer wants to kill me, but she wanted to kill me. And I don't mean that figuratively. I used to say, like, if I'm not at a meeting, man, come over to my house, look in the backyard and see if there's any shallow graves, because I could be in one. All the things that go on with, you know, parents to child went on with me and my wife, lying, cheating, manipulating, all the above, right? Making her think that she was nuts. But the problem was I had split her and my mom. This is a picture of me and my mom. And so how it worked was I was getting emotional validation from my mom. And I want to camp out here and see if y'all have any questions about this, because this is real, real important. When we talk about setting boundaries and how do we influence our children or how do we influence our spouse, we focus a lot on what? Financial boundaries. Typically that comes up. Are you paying for anything that you can kind of pull back in? Are they living in your house? And it's very, very important. But I want to tell you, emotional leverage is just as important. Anybody want to take a shot on what emotional leverage is? Anybody want to take a shot on what I mean by that?
Maybe always being there for the person. Always
Being there, validating the person, kind of like saying you're okay. You're okay. This isn't. She's overreacting. She's making a bigger deal of this. Why is that important? Because I wasn't a narcissist. I wasn't a sociopath. I was like a hurting unit, and I needed to run to somebody who would pat me on the back and say everything's going to be okay. And inadvertently, that became my mom. And so this pattern unfolded that probably went on for years, where it would hit the fan, I would go get emotional validation, and everything would be fine, and I would continue doing my thing, and we would run that cycle over and over again until they formed what I like to call the unholy alliance. And they started going to get educated on this stuff, and they started to what? Work together and build a team. And these were really the only folks that were really important to me in my life. To get that, they didn't have to find anyone else. It didn't have to go any deeper than this. And that's why family recovery is so important. And they started to change their behavior, which ultimately led to me changing my behavior. Does that make sense? It wasn't, how do I fix Rich? It was literally like, what can we do different? What are some of the things that we can do different, which ultimately led to me realizing that the jig is up here, this isn't going to work anymore. I got so uncomfortable with the feelings around just feeling like totally alone all the time. Nobody to validate me, nobody to tell me I was okay, and it drove me to recovery. You guys get that? Now, I was 29 years old, 30 years old. So I'm not saying it's going to work the same way for everybody. I was primed for this thing. I had a career, I had kids, and but it was exceedingly important for them to learn what was going down and for people to act different. And they had to act different in different ways. My wife had to back off, believe it or not. For her, the pattern was she would get angry, we would fight, you know, you're going to have to leave, get out, all that stuff. It was a script. I could have written a script. It was literally a script. And what? That would fuel my using, and I would be like indignant, how dare you kind of stuff. And my mom had to learn how to do the boundaries. She had to be the one to eventually meet me at the front door and say, you can't stay here. You guys get that? So it was different. It's different for different people on what you have to work on. I knew it was changing for my mom when she met me on the front deck and said, you can't stay here, I already did my time, which is a really terrible thing for her to say. I mean, think about that. Like, being with me was like being in jail. And for my wife, what it was is, this is going to sound very, very counterintuitive. For my wife, what it was is she stopped fighting with me. She stopped confronting me. I'll never forget New Year's Eve. It would have been New Year's Eve 2000. Wrecking the van, on all these pills, totally like wasted. Horrible night, one of the worst nights of my life. And driving back to Pittsburgh from where we were outside of Pittsburgh at the ski resort. Driving back, and she wouldn't argue with me, and she wouldn't say anything, and she wouldn't confront me, and it was so weird, and it was so uncomfortable to me. Where I always joked that, like, I literally started to take her position. I was like arguing with myself. And I was saying, like, you probably think that was out of line. Well, that really wasn't out of line, and she just sat there and didn't say anything. So what was she doing? She was doing the same thing my mom was doing, but her pattern was different that had to change. You guys, so that's what you're trying to look at. You're trying to look at what is it that I can do? What do I particularly need to do in this situation that's going to send a signal, this isn't going to continue. We're not continuing in this pattern. Let's stop here and see if you have any questions, because it's so important. Families exist with roles and rituals and ways of doing things, and some of them good and some of them bad, but they are there, and if I followed you around your house, I would pick them out and be able to write them down and say, this is what you're doing. You're assuming this role, you're assuming that role, you're the rescuer, you're the disciplinarian, that kind of thing. You'll see many, many times whenever one person will do all the talking in any kind of like tense situation. They'll be like kind of the point person, who's sort of the hammer, right? And then what's the other person do? Then there's usually another person who takes the other side, like, well, maybe it's not that bad, right? This is all very, very natural, guys. This is not because you're doing anything wrong. It's not even called codependence. It's not even really enabling. It's family systems. It's how it works.
So your mom and your wife got on the same page, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that pushed you to a point of being uncomfortable, right? What if they hadn't formed the unholy alliance and one of them moved in a better way, but the other one continued the behavior?
Yeah, it's a great question. Sometimes you don't have a team. Sometimes you're acting on your own. Obviously, that makes it much more difficult, especially in this case where I had an out. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered if I didn't have a place to go. But if I have that place to go, guys, I mean, I'm riding this thing out. And the sad news is maybe I'm not the executive director of Favor Greenville. We never got to know each other. That would be sad. Because I would probably be what? Spinning out, doing my thing. I don't know how that would go down. I think in this situation it would have taken longer. I think anything's possible in any given situation for you to affect change. I just think if you don't have all the players on the board, it's going to get much more difficult.
You would have been uncomfortable nearly as fast.
Not nearly as fast. It probably would have taken, unfortunately, it probably would have taken something more tragic. You'll see that happen a lot, right? Where people will wind up maybe with a DUI and going to jail or getting in a car accident and hurting somebody. You can't. And the other thing is I only had 2 people, right? You can get in some situations, especially if the person's younger, where there could be 4 or 5 important people that need to be involved in this conversation. The more moving pieces, the harder it is. But sometimes you got to get grandma involved. You got to get uncles or aunts or whoever it is. We talked this weekend when we were going through some of this stuff. It was in an intervention training, and we were talking about if you are the only person. So his question was, what if it's one person? You're kind of like a lone wolf. We would suggest, can you find anyone that has any influence over the person? And in this workshop we did, for example, people were talking about find somebody from work or find a girlfriend. Go outside of the traditional kind of like what you would think of as the team.
Okay.
Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Do you guys all understand that? If you feel like you're alone in this, then you want to try to see who else you can move into the conversation. It's really hard to do an intervention or to have a meeting or to try to move a person along if it's just you alone. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just tough for obvious reasons, right? One of the things about having at least 2 people in the room is it's harder for the person to tell you that you're crazy. If I can get you alone, I can talk you into the fact that 2 + 2 = 18. If I get you alone, give me enough time, I can tell Dory that, like, hey, listen, Dory, this is Monday. And on Mondays, you add 14 to it. And then you subtract 7. And then you divide by pi. And if it's the lunar eclipse, you put 4 in, and that's 18. What was I saying? It was 18. And you'll be like, wow, I never really thought of it that way, but yeah, it is 18. So you get 2 people in a room, what happens? Now you have 2 people, hopefully they're saying the same type of stuff. Hopefully they're seeing the same type of stuff. It gets harder to say you're crazy, I'm fine. You guys get that part? This is really tough because sometimes we will encourage people to get somebody in a room that's a little bit counterintuitive. The best example would be like a boyfriend or a girlfriend who you're kind of like, well, I think they use too. But But many times, if you talk to them, maybe they can get in touch with the idea that the person, wow, that's cool. So remember, one of the things we like to do when we're actively using substances is to say how much worse people are than us. So you would get me to say that, like, yeah, Nicole's way out of control. Let me come help her. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because it makes us feel better if we're able to identify. I have been surprised, guys, how many times I've seen like a using friend participate in an intervention. It's really, really, really counterintuitive. Most people say that'll never happen, but there's something about it. I think it's genuine a lot of times. They really do think that the person's out of control. I think they feel better about themselves that they're not on the receiving end of the intervention. But for you, all it is who else can help me move this thing along? Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, you've used your family situation a number of times now. I've never heard you mention your father in this. Was he involved?
My father is actively using. I'm estranged from my dad. I haven't talked to my dad for 11 years.
At that point in time,
He wasn't in the picture at all.
yeah,
Or he probably was. This is 19 years ago. I mean, he technically was part of my life, but he wasn't. That would have been bad. There are some people you don't want to do that with, right? Because it would have turned, there's no way that I would have been anything other than aggressive. And they would have known that. You'll know that. You guys get it. It's a fantastic question. How did they know not to invite him, right? How did they not to? Because it was just open knowledge that if I got a shot at this guy, I was going to, like, try to kill him. You know, because of the baggage and things that we had in our family. And so, if you know that, you don't invite the person. Does that make sense? You don't invite somebody to turn it into that type of conflict. What I'm suggesting is you can be creative if it's within manageability. You look puzzled.
no, I just, that family dynamic.
Oh, yeah,
We talk about so much.
Yep.
And I had never heard that part of the story.
And that was really, and you guys may know this, and maybe this is to your point, you're going to have situations where there's somebody who in theory should be there, but is so spun out or so problematic that they can't be there. You might have that with a sibling, for example. You'll see that sometimes with siblings. There are many times whenever, like, I've said, he can't come. He's going to kill his brother if he comes. You know what I mean? Like, no, he cannot be there. Because anger between siblings tends to run really, really high.
And blame and everything else.
And really, they're so angry, and how dare you do that to mom? How dare you do that to dad? And if you brought them in to be part of something like this, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. You know, I've had the experience, even if the person has, like, ascended to the idea that they were going to be on board. Hey, yeah, I get this, you know, and then they get there, and what happens? As soon as the kid says, nah, I don't have that problem, the sibling just goes off. You know what I mean? They don't have the ability to regulate and if you've ever been a sibling who's watched, because I have, my brother is in recovery too, and my style of using and the way that I did it, guys, is I was not aggressive with anybody. That's not how I rolled. I tried to be charming. I tried to get by that way. I was never an intimidator. Does that make sense? But there are some people they try to intimidate other people into doing what they want. My brother had that style, so I can't see myself ever being in a room and doing an intervention with him. Maybe now I could, but back in the day, you would go to all that anger, all that frustration, all that fear. And so that you have to be sensible about who you bring into this process. But it's hard to do it if it's just you. Yes?
So, I'm in the same situation, but it's flipped. My daughter-in-law is the one who's loving and listening and not setting boundaries, and I'm the
Okay.
one who's, no, you must set
Yes.
boundaries, and it has really backfired on me, and I'm basically been pushed out.
That's also not uncommon. So the strategy becomes, how do you get somebody to learn? How do you get somebody to pay attention and start taking care of things that they need to take care of?
Especially when she's being verbally and emotionally abused.
Yes. Yes.
It's like,
Yep. So I know that this has come up in here before, where we've said, how do we get dad here? How do we get daughter-in-law here? That kind of thing. So the first thing would be, people got to get educated on what's going down. That's the very first part of this equation, and I'm going to go over some stuff tonight. So it would be, how do you get the person educated on what they're dealing with? How do you get them educated on the fact that it's not just going to go away? How do you get them educated on the fact that this is a brain disorder and it's something other than, hey, honey, it'll never happen again? That's what my family started to learn. They started to learn that this is what this is called, this is what it looks like. But what do you, can you get her here becomes the question. Would she ever come to a group like this? What's your answer in your case?
I have not been successful
Yeah,
so far.
yeah. And does anyone have any successful strategies other than kidnapping in terms of getting a reluctant family member here? Yes.
I used to just turn on the Facebook Live thing, my husband's disabled, and I just turn it on when we're in.
So that's a great idea. You can get them to look at other material. You can get them to read. Here's what's interesting. You have to try to do it in a way where you use some finesse. If you've ever been told to change anything, or if you've ever been told anything about yourself, like, hey, you need to look at this, you're enabling, or what happens when you tell another person something like that?
Defensive.
They get defensive, they push back, right? So you have to be careful, because in your efforts to get them to come, sometimes you'll actually make them dig in and not want to come. So you have to try to figure out different ways to get them exposed to the information. You have to, and it takes a while. I'm sure that the Unholy Alliance, it took a while to get that thing formed, right? It was not quick. It took conversations, and I think what happened, to be honest with you, it got so hard to ignore that kind of prompted it and moved it along. So you can try to have conversations that sound like you already did, and she's pushing back. You might want to say, I'm not going to go there for a little bit.
And my son has told me, don't talk to her anymore, just talk to me.
Yeah, yeah. And you can think about how you want to handle that. You can all put yourself in a situation where, how do I want to respond to that? I won't feed into that. You can kind of start talking about what can you control. But you got the thing, like, if you got to get them here to get this thing moved along, especially in a situation where she's the one there, right, living there, that's going to be tough. You're going to have only so much influence. Can you guys relate to that? You're going to have only so much influence in some of those situations. Now, in general, what you're trying to do with a boundary is, I don't know why this thing's running. I keep pushing the button. Why is it doing that? I'm going to snap.
Just to mess with you.
So, okay. So a boundary is meant to be, it's not meant to be a rule. Serenity now. Let's go. I don't know what to tell you to do. Let's pause this thing right here like that. That won't work either. I've never had this happen to me ever before in my life.
Who are
So
those people that tried to get in your...
this is Purdue Pharma. Purdue Pharma follows me and tries to ruin my family groups. All right. So when you think of boundaries, if you can get your loved one here, or even if you start working on himself, a couple principles or a couple things to think of. You want to avoid, for some of the reasons we just talked about on how human beings react, and this isn't to give anyone a break, and this isn't to make things easier for the person. This is to make things easier for you. You want it to feel more about, this is what I need in my life, not about, I want to control you. So we try to avoid things like, here are the rules. Here are the rules if you live at our house. Here are the rules if you're going to, we're going to be in this relationship. Rules are made to be broken. And they set you up for these kind of like, to like butt heads. We want to encourage you to talk more about, what do you need in your life for you to be okay? What do you need in your life for you to be okay? So simple examples. One of the best with kids is this idea, they come out of treatment and, hey, what time do you have to be in at night? What time do you have to be in at night? It's always brought up. It's always part of the discharge plan. Well, he's got to be in at midnight. For a 20-year-old, you're just getting started at midnight. Do you guys get that? Like, understand that part of the equation. Totally normal. Circadian rhythm, all that stuff, totally normal. We are sleeping for 4 hours and they're just getting going, right? So, but your deal is like, he's living at your house. You can't go to sleep until he's in. I don't know if anybody knows what that phenomenon is like. I deal with that all the time. Isn't that the weirdest thing in the world? Like, if you're coming in, I can't go to sleep until you're in. So you're going to have to come in at midnight. That's the deal. We're going to make that the curfew. Now, I can say, curfew's at midnight, period. Be there. Or I can say, hey, can we talk about this? I can't sleep until you get here. So as long as you're here, I need you to be in at midnight. All right? Oh, that's the same thing, Rich. No, it's not. The second one is you talking about yourself. The first one is you putting a rule out there, and rules are made to be broken and to be argued with. So the thing is, well, that's ridiculous. I Googled it. Every other kid in America stays out until 3 o'clock in the morning. Every kid. Every single kid. Right? Well, I talked to Sally's mom, and she comes in and, Sally doesn't count. She's left-handed. Every right-handed kid. And then you're like in this argument where it's harder for the person to argue with you about your feelings. So they can think what they want, but it's hard to look at you and say, that's not true. Dory, you can sleep whenever you want. No, I can't. I can't sleep until you're in the house. So that's a very simple example. You would try to apply that to any situation, but what you're trying to do is talk about yourself. You're trying to talk about, this is about me. These boundaries aren't about controlling you. Because again, guys, especially the younger they are, really actually that's anyone. Start telling people how they have to behave. Start telling adults how they have to behave, that they got to be in at a certain time and they're allowed to go a certain place. And that is, you're sort of setting yourself up for conflict. Would you agree? But if you say, this is what I need to be okay, I cannot tolerate, you coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning because I can't sleep and I have to work tomorrow morning. I get it, man. Every kid is up till 3. I'm sorry. You'll be out of here soon, I'm sure, in your own place, and then you can do what you want to do. Yes?
When you set that boundary and it works for 3 days and then they stop and just go back to, coming in whenever they want to, are you keeping you up? I mean, do you get to then I'm like, okay, 3 strikes and you're out. And then I feel like I'm...
Well, and that's where you get into a tricky situation. So what you're doing, you're talking about, initially, we would encourage where you're just sort of talking about, this is how we're going to roll when you're at the house, and you're avoiding ultimatums, okay? You get that part? This isn't necessarily what you're taught from other programs. If you had a loved one go to treatment and stuff, they probably had them come out with a contract or something. I don't believe in that stuff. It would be more about a conversation. Then if it's not working like what you're describing, then you got to put on the what? Here's what's going to happen. If A doesn't happen, B is going to happen. And the rules there are, whatever you say for B, you have to be able to follow through on. So you kind of have to be thinking ahead on how you're going to do that. So if you say 3 strikes and you're out, and 3 strikes come and you're not out, then there's a problem. It's almost better to not say anything at all than to say 3 strikes and you're out and not be able to follow through. Right? Because, it was 3 strikes and out for me like hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. I never, ever thought any of them were legit. You get where I'm coming from? I never thought. It's like anything else. So you'd have to figure out in your mind, like, what do I do with that? When my daughter was hospitalized, and she's doing great now, but whenever she was hospitalized, it was, I went to the discharge planning meeting, walked in and said, there's nothing my daughter can do to make me kick her out of the house. That's just where I was at that time. That doesn't mean I would be there a year from now. But I wasn't even going to talk about it. I wasn't even going to BS anybody. I can sit here and say all day that if A happens, B is going to happen. But I knew B wasn't going to happen. So you have to know your situation, and you have to get strategic on what are you going to say and how are you going to follow through on that. Do you guys get that? Carolyn?
Is it counterproductive to say, I've done it before, I will do it again, so you need to straighten up?
You probably don't even have to say it, but you certainly can. You certainly can. She knows, if you did it once, they know, they know
you're capable.
Yes. Like, that's a big deal. Once you've kind of gone there and gone to the wall one time, I don't think there's anything wrong with reminding somebody that we've been here before.
So calmly, but...
Yeah, but people, we file that away. We know Mom's serious, she's serious, that kind of thing. But there's nothing wrong with saying it. There's nothing wrong with saying anything if you're saying it in a calm kind of way.
That's the hard
And it is hard. You got to pick your time for it. You got to pick your time for saying it, right? And remember, the guidelines mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. So, and if you think about what you're doing there, it's literally like communication breaks down. Communication involves three things. One is what I want to say, what I actually say, and what the other person hears. Many times we don't even know what we want to say. The best example I can give you is when a parent says, he has to do recovery. He said when he was leaving treatment that he would do recovery. And then if you say, what does that mean? Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, what does that actually mean, and how would you know whether he was doing it? Because if you ask him, smoking weed and watching Gilligan's Island is recovery. Just because it's a different pathway, Rich. Come on. You know, do you get where so you have to be like, no, recovery is, you said you'd go to 3 meetings a week and still see your therapist. So make sure you have it, and then make sure you say it. I don't know if you've ever said anything where it came out of your mouth and you were like, oh, I wish I could live like on the 5-second rewind and bring that back. And then the part about don't say it mean is really meant to be that increases the likelihood that the person's going to actually receive what you're saying. People are about, 60% more open in a positive environment. So if you're going at somebody waving your finger, what's happening? They're shutting down, they're not listening to you. So you want to say it in a way, but I think it breaks down even in like mean what you say land. I think many times people aren't even sure exactly what they want out of this situation. What is it that they have to do that you will accept? And then if you're in a 3-strike situation or however you frame it up in your mind, what are you going to do if they don't do that? That's where the rubber meets the road, right? And how do you know, many times, and I'll give you an example. So many times the person's been dealing with this for a while and it's drinking and it's using and it's continuing, right? It's still right there. Everyone knows it. Heck, they may even admit it. It's so blatantly obvious. They're getting high. They're using again. And the deal is I can't be part of that. That was the deal when you were when the person was in rehab. I will not support your self-destruction. But you know what's going on. And you know what's going on. And you know what's going on. We would say it's better to have a meeting and recalibrate that statement than it is to just ignore the behavior. Do you follow what I'm saying? It would be better to bring your son or daughter in and say, you know what? I cannot kick you out. When we were at rehab, I really wish I could follow through on this. I cannot kick you out, and I feel like I'm destroying you. But I just can't do it because I'm too afraid. I'm scared to death. That is much more productive. I'm talking like 180% more productive than just ignoring it. And you could do something like that and walk away from the table. And I'm telling you, it'll freak them out. I'm telling you, if I was on the receiving end of that when I was in active addiction, I'd have been like, what in the hell was that? She didn't yell at me. She didn't confront me. She said she thinks that she's contributing to my death and destruction. And then she walked away without saying anything else. There was no threat involved. You guys get it? That will get the person thinking. That will get the person, and what is it about thinking that's good? I mean, in general, thinking is good. Well, I mean, when you're in active addiction, guys, just so you know how it works, and I'll show you a picture of the brain. When you're in active addiction, you're on automatic pilot. What you're doing is you're seeking the next thing. You want to do the next thing. You're not reflecting on anything. Reflecting on things is very uncomfortable. So as soon as you say something like that, what does that do? That doesn't compute. There was no place. I don't have a file for that. So now I have to go and I have to think about this, and I have to try to figure this out. Try to like make sense of this situation. When I used to teach at the community college, now this is funny, guys, and using substances isn't funny, but this was funny. This is funny. So at the community college, there would be a kid like sitting right here, like, and he would be high. There was always kids smoking weed before my classes. It was sociology. They were taking it for an elective, right? And so if the kid was sitting there, I would start talking to him. I'd be like, so here's this, and I'd go over here, and I wouldn't say anything, and I'd just look that way, and it would freak him out. And he would leave being like, I'm never coming back to that dude's class high again. Right? So what was I doing? I didn't have the willpower or the willingness to confront him. I didn't want him in my class being under the influence, so I found a way to mess with him. Now, that's not what I'm not encouraging you to mess with your loved one, but I'm encouraging you to find a way to mess up his or her experience. Does that make sense? If you're not at a point where you can have that direct conversation, the next thing is a conversation that's going to make him uncomfortable and not have it be business as usual every day. When you talk to people who are in early recovery, you hear them talk about Groundhog Day. Using was like Groundhog Day. What's that mean, guys? It's the same thing day in and day out. Same thing day in and day out. As soon as you start saying something like that, it's no longer the same thing day in and day out. And then what that does is it creates this, like, is this going to last? Is this going to continue? What's going to happen next? People will get all wondering, like, what is she up to next time? Whereas a direct confrontation or a fight sometimes is comfortable. It's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. Now, the best thing to do would be to say, here's what I'm going to do, and here's how it is, guys. And I am ready to follow through on this. But I don't judge anyone for that. I just shared, my experience with my kid, and you may or may not be ready to go there. As a husband, wife, parent, whatever, you just may not. What gets in the way of going there? Anybody want to throw out, like, what would keep you from going there, even if you've given the boundary, and even if you know, like, the right thing to do, but you're not doing it? What would keep you from doing it? Anybody have any thoughts? Fear is probably the biggest one. When you talk to people, and it's fear of what?
Overdose.
So it's fear of the worst. But if you look at it, there's usually like a trail of things. It's not like just because I said that the person overdosed, right? It's because what? She or he's going to leave. They're going to get mad. And if they leave, or I have to actually move them out, what's going to happen next? They're going to wind up on somebody's couch. And it's not going to be a good person. Do you follow? Like, it's a train of events that you put together that leads you to this, like, worst case scenario. And I completely respect that. And you'd have to find a way to confront that in your mind and think that through if you were going to go there. You'd literally have to kind of sit down and what? Like, think that through and say, can I deal with that if that does happen? Or is that likely to happen? Where is this really likely to go? Is it worth even having the conversation? And you may decide, I can't do it right now. I told you what I said when I went into that counselor's office. It's not happening. It ain't going down like that. I won't do it. Don't even bother. My son had a similar experience with him when he was at the University of Pittsburgh, and I had no problem doing it. I remember dropping him off at a bus station in Pittsburgh. He was going to Philadelphia to see his girlfriend, right? And he's going to Philadelphia to see his girlfriend. He has like $7 in his pocket, a suitcase. It's like 9 degrees in Pittsburgh. I remember driving away and looking in the mirror, and he's like the happiest person in the world. Just sitting there smiling, and I had no trepidation. You can call it sexist, you can call it whatever. He was a little older too. You get where I'm coming from? You'll have reasons why sometimes you can do it and sometimes you can't. You got to honor that, and you got to know yourself. Now I want to take a step back though and say, even if you can't do the boundary that you wanted to do or the one you said you were going to do, it would be good to try to find something. Can we all agree on that? So even if you can't, like, even if it's not 3 strikes and you're out, maybe it's 3 strikes and I don't know what else you could put in there, but the longer you go without saying or doing anything, the worse this is. Even if you can't do the ideal thing. So maybe sometimes parents have said things like, I can't take your phone calls anymore. I can't take your phone calls. They couldn't pull the plug on the rent because they didn't want the person to be homeless, but I just can't take these calls. It's killing me. You get the idea was don't just let it go by. Something is better than nothing. But Carol?
One thing that I like to encourage people to do is, if you're not ready yet to know what that boundary is that they're going to do, to say, if this happens again, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know something is going to change.
That's a good statement. You'll hear people talk about that. You'll hear people say, I'm going over to Favor to try to figure out what to do. We encourage people to say that type of stuff.
Let's hear someone you tell them you're having a meeting.
I have a meeting here at Favor, and because we just don't know what to do. Hey, when in doubt, be honest, right? When in doubt, just be straightforward. Like, I'm clueless, man. This is horrible. This is terrible. You're ripping my heart out every freaking day, and I can't deal with this, but I'm going to go try to figure it out. And you know what? I probably won't even be able to do it, but I'm going to go try to figure it out. The thing to not do is ignore it. Do you get that? And there's two things to not do. One is to ignore it. The other is to just flip out about it. Those two things don't accomplish anything, right? The first one, no one says anything. The second one, we love conflict, y'all. Like, it's on page 4 of the Addict Handbook. Like, when you go, Jerry Garcia teaches, he teaches the class. That's a joke. It was a joke, man. And so it's like, what do? You want to fight. You want to fight. You want the smoke screen. You want to argue about whether or not you got high last Wednesday, or was it Tuesday, or what happened in 1973, right? You want to argue about all these things, and you would prefer to live in that chaos and that conflict because that fuels all these different things, right? I had to go out, I had to storm out the door to go get high, you know. Or also, it gets you off task on the feelings, right? The feelings of it. I don't want my mom to say, hey, you're killing me. This is killing me. I don't know what to do. I don't want to see my mom cry unless she's screaming at me, right? Because why? I can live in the fight. I can't live in that other stuff. I don't want to hear about the sadness and the fear. Do you guys get that? That's very uncomfortable. So let's not go there. So doing something, a calm kind of like conversation around how you want to control your life, how you're trying to take your life back, how you're trying to have a life worth living. Now remember, I said this once already, I'm going to say this 3 times during these presentations. It's impossible to do this without the person getting angry at you, or trying to make you feel guilty, or trying to push your buttons in some kind of way. It's impossible, guys. It's just human nature, right? We don't want to be told what to do. Go tell somebody, no for anything, and there's going to be a reaction. So go into it with your eyes wide open. Sometimes I feel like we have very unrealistic expectations. Richard, you can no longer live in my house and continue to drink and use cocaine. Why, thank you, Mother. I will be on my way now, and as a matter of fact, I think I will enroll in rehabilitation. That's what we want. I'm sorry, man. I'm all off tonight, guys. It's like I'm tired. I drove back from Pennsylvania yesterday, so I haven't got a lot of sleep. So so it's like we want this reaction, and we want it to be okay, and we want it to be smooth, and we want it to be like what we see on TV. It's never going to be that way. There will always be some level of this. And a lot of times, unfortunately, people really do know what to say to push a button or to kind of get that to kick in. And I have these themes of like guilt and blame, because I feel like other than fear, this is probably one of the most common kind of things. It's impossible. People will get angry as you go through this process. Yes, sir.
You run the risk, though, of fear being another one of those bullets.
Yes.
Guilt and that we start playing the fear. I'm afraid that this is going to happen.
Yes.
And then that's not an argument, but it's a little bucket all by itself. I get them into the fearful area, and then we move on.
Yeah, the fear part of it is huge, and it's worse. I've been doing this for 19 years, and what I can tell you is the fear part of the factor is more elevated than I've ever seen it before. And it's strange, because I believe it comes from a good place. It's because there's more attention on this issue than ever before. So the public knows more about this because why? The overdose epidemic, and it's on the news and stuff, but I think that has also ratcheted up the fear. So I think fear runs the day a lot of times, to be perfectly honest with you. And yes, sir.
How about optimism? You're kind of hoping, that if they stay in the house, maybe they'll get it.
Oh, that's a great one.
Once in a while, they'll show a little glimmer.
Oh, yeah.
Good behavior.
Do you guys hear that? I think that's right. Like, so you see something that you can grab a hold of.
I agree.
And that will be more likely to happen the younger the person is, and more likely to happen the earlier you are in this process. That's less likely to happen when it's happened 20 other times. You guys get that? But early on, that'll definitely be something. Okay, I see some improvement here. Definitely. And sometimes you can ride that out. The other thing that's there is stigma. The idea of being judged by the world. What if I really, really like say what I need to say and this gets worse, and I have to answer questions about this. And somebody this weekend was talking about what if it wasn't here in South Carolina, but what if I have to call the police and they come to the development, and I'm on the homeowners kind of like board, and you know, this is a big deal, man. This is a huge deal. Stigma and shame around this issue is alive and well. And if we're in this room, we probably are working our way through it, but the general public is still driven by, what are they going to say about me? What are they going to think about me? If I have to kick my husband out, if I have to do something with my child. It's getting better, but it's still not, we're still not there as a society. So in addition to fear and guilt and shame and all those things, this idea of stigma. And what'll happen then is people will kind of be like, let's just wait this out, man. This could get better. This could get better, right? And if it gets better and they right the ship, then we don't ever have to deal with the fallout. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was gonna say that the addict knows that too.
Yeah.
And they will use that too.
Yeah.
Oh, really? You gonna kick me out? You know, what's everybody gonna say when they find out you kick me out?
Yeah, yeah.
And you
Yep.
have to get to the point to where you just say, hey, I'm way past that.
You'd have to get past that. You would have to get past that, just like you would have to get past fear. Were you going to say something, sir?
Yeah, there's kind of the flip side of this, that at one point, does the user feel concerned about stigma and shame in society?
Yeah, I think for sure. You'll talk to people about why they didn't get help, and they'll say it's because of this. I think for sure that person will genuinely be concerned about that. Okay, genuinely concerned about that. But I also think that person's operating kind of with a one-track mind of, where do I get a hold of this substance? Where do I get a hold of this substance? Where do I get a hold of this substance? And even if they say that to you, where they say, like, you're going to kick me out, what are people going to say? I'm not saying we don't believe that when we say it, but really, it's just another move. It's another maneuver. It's another thing to say to kind of keep the status quo. Because the status quo increases the likelihood I'm going to be able to get my drugs tomorrow or get my alcohol. If nothing changes, that's a good thing. Even if I'm in a miserable situation and we're fighting all the time, this is just how the brain works. It's not even really logical if you think about it, but it's like, if it stays the way it is, it's the territory I know, I'll figure this out. I'll find a way to get it in. I'll find a way to get this done. And it's not even thought, and I'm saying that like as if that's what we're thinking. That is not what's going down, guys. It's like this. It's like boom, it's like automatic pilot. The maneuvering, the full-time job of using. If you talk to people about using and finding ways and means and how do I get through the day, it's a full-time job.
Well, don't you think at least in our case, I felt like she was always thinking, how can I get her off my back? So I can go do whatever I want to do.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And so how do I get her off my back? How do I get her to calm down? How do I get this to like not be a topic of conversation? How do I get it back to square one, right? That's, you know, that's the objective. And even if, and now remember, what's going to make a person most comfortable is if it was the same as it was the day before or the week before. That's why even if it's fighting and it's the same, that's comfortable. Because that's why whenever you have a pattern of behavior and interaction that involves confrontation and you no longer confront, it freaks the person out. It freaks the person out. Here's the pattern in my life. Here's how it goes down, okay? And I don't use anymore. I'll never use a substance as long as I live ever again. I have no desire. It's not who I am or anything. But if I were to go out and use tonight, I'm sure this would be the pattern tonight, okay? It would be, did you get high? Where were you? What were you doing? What do you mean, what was I doing? I'm the freaking CEO of Favorite Greenville, man. What are you talking about? You smell like alcohol. What do you mean I talk? So it would start like that, okay? It would be like an accusation that was correct, followed by complete indignation. Like, how dare you accuse a fine, upstanding citizen like me of using substances? Then she would escalate. Now, I've come to understand what was going on there is one of the things with my wife was it would just drive her nuts when I would lie to her like that. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, it literally went from about the substance to the lie. I don't know if that makes sense at all. But it immediately went to the substance, to the lie. Now, she gets heated, And here's what happens. It turns into like a hammer, like her approach was like a hammer assault around, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? Tell me you did it. Did you do it? I know you did it. Did you? And I've come to understand that she just wanted to be validated that I was lying. Do you follow me? And then I get real worked up and start to push back. And then inevitably, there's a crack in the door on something she said that's not 100% accurate. Okay? So maybe she said, I know you were taking pills. And I'm like, it wasn't pills, right? I smoked a little weed after work, okay, or something like that. And boom, game on, hammered, like right there, laser focused. It is not what you said. How dare you say it? And then it's just yelling and screaming and fighting and arguing. And like, I can't believe you would accuse me of that. I can't believe you would lie, until I left. And I would bolt, and I would spend 2 or 3 days kind of like licking my wounds, going up and getting validation. And then I would come back and I would do what? I'm sorry, that'll never happen again. Here's the other thing I would do, though. Man, I'm giving you guys the playbook. Even while I was apologizing, I would blame her. Okay? I would blame her. It was a backdoor apology. It was a yeah, but apology. But it would work, and I would get back in. Now, the moment that I had that incident that I told you about, and I tried to have that happen, and she just sat there and never said anything. Do you see how it reverses the pattern now? In my brain, where my brain goes, this is all happening subconsciously, guys. It's like almost like a survival instinct. In my brain, I'm like, this is not going down the way it's supposed to. The last 1,000 times, it went down a certain way, and she's not saying anything. And so people, you could say like, well, that was good she wasn't saying anything. Why didn't you just sit there? Hell no. I mean, she could have been, I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe there was like an assassin, right? Like, what's going to happen to me? And I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'm 100% serious. That pattern that we fall in, you reverse it. If you've been non-confrontational, you don't ever swing the pendulum to yelling and screaming. That's not what I mean. But if you've been non-confrontational, you try to be more confrontational. Does that make sense? If it's always been the dad who said something and mom never did, flip the script. You get that? If you've been super confrontational, just let it ride one time. Just literally have them come in and have the person walk in and say, oh, I see you got high today, and go to bed. They will spend the rest of the night pacing the floor. What did that mean? Maybe not like that. That'd be awesome if that's how it was. But so what are you doing? You're trying to change it up. You're trying to change the pattern. Yes?
I even remember telling on myself now, back in high school, getting caught with beer once. And going
You drank alcohol?
I did.
I'm a freaking appalled.
In Kansas, you could drink when you were 18.
Oh my God, if I was in Kansas, that's all I would do.
But my dad just looked at me and said, well, if I haven't taught you right from wrong by now, we have an issue.
And that was all there was to it. Yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't go to bed all night. I wasn't even drunk.
Yeah.
What's it gonna do?
Yep. And it would be like, now that was an example. You weren't in that area. You weren't in that area of being addicted, but it was a reaction that may not have been expected. It was a reaction. You'll hear people say all the time, like, just give me my punishment. Let's get this over with. And it's even more pronounced where substances are. And remember, these patterns evolve over time, and it's not like you guys sit down one day and agree on them. Like you sit at the kitchen table and say, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to fight, then you're going to give me 3 days, and then you're going to forgive me. You know what I mean? It literally happens over time. So you kind of know what, I believe a lot of the time you know what to do. You really do. Like if you're really new at this and you're kind of just getting exposed, you may not have an idea, but many times you know that this isn't okay, right? Your gut tells you that. And really it's how do we do it, which really means how do we do it and get through it and stick to it? Does that make sense? How do we communicate this? How do we actually say it? How do we go from idea to implementation is what this is. And it's all that stuff that I just talked about. It's all those areas of fear and guilt and shame, and how do we negotiate them and go ahead and get this difficult conversation done. Think about life in general, if in the workplace, for example. And if you've ever been in a situation where you had to have a confrontation with a coworker, or maybe you weren't a boss and you were going to talk to an employee, it was those difficult conversations that you know have to happen, but you feel this like anxiety and you don't go there. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That's an example outside the family, but that's the same type of stuff that happens here. So the deal is to try to identify in you, not necessarily in me or your friend or your loved one or your counselor or your therapist, but in you, what is keeping you from going there? What is your particular hang-up? It's usually those themes that we talked about, but we would recommend you try to specifically kind of talk that through. If it is, I literally think that she's going to leave the house, go move in with her boyfriend, and wind up using, and wind up, in the worst case scenario. You got to think that through. Maybe you journal on it. Maybe you talk to a coach about it. You're trying to actually see, like, is this rational? Is this likely to happen? Is there anything else that could happen? Is there another way to have the conversation that decreases the likelihood of that happening? You look it in the face and you try to figure out what to do with it. Do you get where I'm coming from? You don't just let it ride and let it run your life. Yes?
Is writing a letter helpful?
It can be. Yep.
To me, I think I can articulate and kind of process a little bit better putting it, and then I don't have that face-to-face.
Yes. That's one of the reasons if you ever, at Favor Greenville we have 3 levels of intervention, and the most serious that involves the ultimatums involves writing a letter. And it involves presenting a letter to the person. So what's that all about? You collect your thoughts, you kind of think it through. Now you still have to follow through whatever's put in that letter. And I think that may be the most important part of the equation. Am I actually going to be able to do what I say I'm going to do here? Yes?
We've done notes, letters, suggestions to get help. Come here, and more serious help. It just ends up in the trash can and nothing happens.
Yeah.
Nothing said, there's just no.
So Ed, and you guys, again, you're feeling all this out, and I say this stuff, and I want you to understand something. I don't know anybody's situation well enough in here to tell any of y'all what to do. You get that? I am in no way telling you what to do. We're just using these as examples. It would be completely inappropriate for me to tell you what to do. So you have that stuff going down, or you have the person kind of kicking the can down the road, or just straight up ignoring it, or maybe even saying something like, I'll go next week, but they never move. You've got to step back and take control and get real specific on the boundary. So it would go from, here's a letter, we would like you to do this, to like, you have 2 days, or we're going to go file a notice to quit, and you're going to have to leave the house. You got it? That, and I'm not telling you to do that, but I'm telling you, like, listen, no one will follow the boundary just by the sake of the boundary being said. Okay? They will follow the boundary. Why? Because they think you're going to follow through on it. That's why. Even if you're not, even if you were able to pull it off where you faked your way through it. So no one's going to do it just because it's like, hey, I gave you this, and I think you should think about stop using drugs and go to Favor. And the person's like, wow, I never thought of that. It won't go down like that. It'll literally be, are they serious? Now, they won't say it out loud. Now, let's go to one other thing. Also, remember, you're dealing with somebody who's what? All of you are dealing with somebody, if they're in active addiction, who is not rational, who's not thinking when you hand them, you follow what I'm saying? Like, it's not going down, it's not computing the way it computes in your mind, which also means you might have to get just real direct and real straightforward. Have you ever, like, talked to anybody where you have to, like, narrow the focus, and you're just talking you have to get real simple with the instructions? And you got to be careful. That's where you got to get real specific. Here's what we want to do. You got to go to 3 meetings a week, or we can't have you live here. I cannot watch you self-destruct. I can't be part of your self-destruction. I literally cannot live with myself. You got to go to 3 meetings, and what we're going to do is, like, 2 weeks from now, we're going to sit down and we are going to see whether you did that or not. And if we didn't, then something has to change. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you have to, like, define that.
Well,
Yes.
The continuation of that, at the same time, can you ask the individual to say, you write to me what
You can do that. I think a lot of that goes down. Again, you got to remember, guys, there's a continuum here, right? There's a process. And if you guys think about your own experience, if you roll back in time, you can probably remember how you kind of went through some things, right? It isn't, the way you feel today isn't how you felt on day one. And if you're less than optimistic on whether or not this is going to work, you were probably more optimistic on day one. Does that make sense? You have to take into consideration how long you've been doing this. Yes?
These boundaries that you are suggesting, and would you use those with someone that has mental illness, such as social anxiety, depression?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a fantastic question. So what you'll find whenever you talk to people, I spent a lot of time working in community mental health. It had nothing to do with substances. And what you find is that the families dealing with that go through almost the exact same process. And even when substances aren't present, they'll say, like, I'm not sure if I can do this because of this, and they also hit a wall. And you have to honor your feelings whether mental health is present or not. And it's what you're doing is you're gauging how much can I take, and also, like, do I have any influence over this? And what I'll tell you is if mental health is involved, there's breaking points there too. Sometimes people will say, we're going to wait a little longer, we're going to give the person a chance because we don't want to, we don't know what's happening here. But it's very similar to substances. Remember, guys, substance use disorder, if you just think of substance use disorder as defined by the mental health, what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual on Mental Illness, okay? It's all the same thing. It's all from the same book. Does that make sense? It's all diagnosed in the same type of way. So technically there is no difference. It's just that we've been told more about tough love. I don't like the word tough love, but we've been told more about tough love where substances are concerned. But I will tell you, if you get to know the mental health world and you talk to families that have been through it, they go through a similar process. Because what happens is the family will be like, there's a solution here, or there's a potential solution here. We've been told that if you see this psychiatrist, and it's a good psychiatrist, and we can get you on some medicine, and you see talk therapy, and we know people get better, the family hits a wall where they're like, it's here. You're not taking it. You know? And that goes down for both mental health and substance use. It's harder, it's more difficult when the two of them are together and you feel like both of them are genuine. You'll have more difficulty doing it. It would be kind of like if the person has a broken leg, you're going to have more difficulty. But you got to think, like, if you start to say to yourself, what is it that I can do? So can I just take a step back and just say, like, let's pretend that we're not even here to talk about kicking anyone out. You heard what I said about my daughter. No, there's nothing you can say. It ain't happening. Okay? Now, what can I do? Start asking yourself, what can I do? Do I have anything that I have control over that isn't quite that intense, but I can influence this person in any kind of way? Am I paying for a cell phone? Am I don't know, do they want to go to college again next year? You start thinking, like, what can I do? Where can I go with this? We call that financial leverage, if you will. That's one end. And maybe there's nothing there. Maybe there's nothing. You can't influence anything. Then you go to emotional leverage, and you say, what relationship-wise can I do? What conversation can I have that I haven't had yet? You know, do they know how you feel about the situation? Do they know how frightened you are? Do they know, without any boundaries attached to it, without anything that goes like, hey, if you don't go get help, you have to leave, but do they know that you stay awake all night wondering where they are? Do they know how terrified you are, and can you have that conversation with them? Not in a way to make them feel guilty.
That conversation's harder than kicking them out.
Maybe for some people, maybe not. It probably is different for different people. That conversation would be a lot easier for me than I'll kick you out. And what I've noticed is that I've seen that conversation occur, and I've seen it have an impact on people. I've seen it be ignored initially and then have an impact later, like a seed that was planted, for lack of a better term. You know, so if you ever have that conversation, we recommend having it in a very specific way. We call it recovery messaging, and we recommend that you start off by saying, and we recommend you do something like go out to lunch. You don't even want it to have anything to do with an issue either. You don't do it right in the middle of of the car accident or the person coming home drinking and driving. You don't do it then. You pick a time and you go out to lunch and you sit down and you say, I don't know how this conversation is going to go. I'm scared about this conversation. I don't know how it's going to go. I want you to know that I love you too much to sit and watch this go down. And I need you to know how I feel about this and where I'm coming from. And all I want you to do is listen. And when we're done here, you know, you can go ahead and go about your way. I'm not done yet, Carol. Carol cutting me off. I was on something there. You see that? Like how, do you guys notice how I was using my therapist voice and everything? And Carol's like, let me say something. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so you know, so you're sitting there, you're saying, and you front load it as much as possible, okay? With things like, I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm not here to tell you how to run your life. I am not asking you to go to rehab. All the things that they can object to, right? Try to front load it, and then say, but this is killing me. It's breaking my heart. And, you know, we want you to try to get some help. We want you to get some help. I just want you to, can you just think about it? Can you just think about that? Can you think about going back to meetings? Can you think about going to favor? Can you think about going, you know? And then you just let it go, guys. Now understand that may not be the perfect solution. The better solution may be get your act together or get the hell out. Do you follow what I'm saying? But what I'm telling you is that let's be realistic about things, right? We're not all going to do that. So if we're not going to do that, it's not like either kick them out or do nothing. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, here's the other thing. Your family members love you. Your family members love you. I loved my mom the whole entire time. I loved my wife the whole entire time. When I tell you it had nothing to do with them, I mean, I can't even emphasize that. I can't even explain how it was never with malice toward anyone in my family. It is a whole different ball game, guys. Like you are going for it like as if you're starving to death. And again, maybe I shouldn't paint with a broad brush. I don't know everyone's situation in here. So you're allowed to say, you know, I love you and this is killing me. Now I want to go on the record. It can progress for a person, right? Where their brain can get to a point where they're not even going to be able to handle that, right? They're going to, you know your loved one, whether they would act out and push back. It may not be the thing to do for everyone. But it's true. It impacts people, man. I've sat and I've watched it happen. I've watched it happen 3 weeks later after it was said. I've seen that statement take impact without the mom or the dad ever knowing it took impact. You follow what I'm saying? I've had the conversation with people when they've told me the story about how that was intense, man. That was the beginning of the end for me. That was when I started to, just like the story I told y'all about how the beginning of the end for me was what? My wife not fighting back. Do you guys get it? It wasn't the day I got clean. That wasn't my clean date. That was the beginning of the end. And so what I'm suggesting is you can do that stuff if you're not comfortable with doing the other stuff. Does that make sense to everyone? Does that make sense? Carol, you going to say something? Gee. Yes, Nicole.
Mine was, I'm sorry, did you remember Carol?
No, she didn't.
Mine was, you're on a sinking ship.
Yeah.
And you're dragging me and my kids
Yes.
down with you, and
Yes.
I have to jump off.
I have to jump off, yep.
And it's hard, and it's whatever, but
And I love you.
I cannot get
Yep.
on this.
Yep.
I can't stay on this ship.
And when you say it, remember, you want to say it. This is definitely one you don't want to say in the middle of a fight because you want it to register, right? So we're always like, say it at the end of the conversation or say it like, and then that kind of be it. Does that make sense? Because what you if it's in the middle of an argument, it's not going to get registered. Were you going to say something, sir?
Yeah, you said you had three, I believe. You had sort of material leverage, right? And then you had emotional leverage. Was there a third?
So the third is,
What I have is, I don't give an F.
yeah.
Material, emotional, there's no threats.
So that's a great question. I'm glad you. So the third is actually like what I call external leverage, which winds up being other parts of the world. So what happens then is, and it's not the ideal, is you do not stand in the way, and sometimes you even have to facilitate their involvement in other systems like the legal system. And again, it's a very tough conversation, but I've seen situations where the only thing a family member can do is, I know he's using drugs in the basement, I'm calling the police. Or he just got in the car, he's drinking and driving, I'm calling the police. That's what I call external leverage. And it's mostly exercised by the family because they don't go bail the person out, if you want me to be honest. Sometimes it's leverage because they will. The best example I can give you is drinking and driving. Somebody will be at the house, the kid will, or you'll just know the kid is drinking and driving, and you'll call and you'll say, here, the license plate, he just went north on, Woodruff Road or whatever, and then the police, I call that external leverage. So, and external leverage tends to be used more the longer you've been dealing with this. External leverage is very rarely used for like an 18-year-old. It's used like, hey man, his kid's 42 years old or 38 years old, or I've been dealing with this for this long, I'm not coming and getting you. You're in there, you're dealing with it. That is something that's very uncomfortable with families, but I'm telling you, like sometimes, especially if you feel like the person is 100% incorrigible or out of control or unmanageable, where you cannot even wrap your arms around the person and the system has to wrap their arms around. We call that external control, and there are ways that you can think that through, and sometimes you can't do anything with that either. Sometimes external control is also like a person's job, for example. That's maybe even a more common thing in terms of the family soliciting people from work to support them. You look at like lawyers who wind up in recovery, many times it's initiated at the workplace. Many times. That's external, kind of outside the family system, get your act together type stuff. But that's what that's all about. And whenever you're asking people, when you're thinking about what do we want from the person or how can we move this thing forward, we also encourage you to be flexible with that and to think things through and to not think that this means the person has to go to rehab necessarily or the person has to go to 90 AA meetings in 90 days. You can be flexible. There are things like therapy. I'm sorry, this is just me disclaiming on the group. But self-help mutual supports is AA. Our group, every day at noon, is an option. We have groups on Tuesday and Thursday evening that are different. They're called Smart Recovery. Sometimes people will go to a therapist and start to work on this. Sometimes people will go, maybe they have a mentor. We encourage people to, again, your situation is individualized depending on how serious it is. Cast a wide net in terms of what help is as well. Remember that we're not, this is all what's called intuitive medicine anyway. Addiction and mental health fall under this part of medicine called intuitive medicine, which means what? Judgment. Rich's judgment call. Whereas precision medicine would be like, you got a broken leg, Dory, I'm going to put a cast on it and you're going to be better in 8 weeks and I know you're going to be better because look, right there it is. That's not how it is with addiction, right? So cast a wide net. Cast a wide net. Keep coming to this group and keep learning and applying what I say to your situations. What we're gonna do with the group is going to be a little bit different as well because so Favor Greenville, when Favor first started, we had an interesting way of handling families and doing family. We never did a lecture like this tonight, and some people have requested that I start facilitating the Kumbaya group. Not that, I mean, you guys do great, but they like, I don't run that group anymore. You know what I mean by the Kumbaya group when there's a circle and it's like, tell me how you feel. So I'm going to run a little bit of that, and then I'm going to start doing some Saturday workshops for families. And the idea with the Saturday workshop would be, typically it would be in the morning, and it would get down into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes of what should I do. And what we did before was I literally would use somebody's example. Somebody would be brave enough to say, hey, can you do my situation? And I would say, here's what you're going to do. And then other people would say, well, that sounds similar. Here's what I'm going to do. Do you follow me? And it just devotes a little bit more time to the circumstance. And what we find, guys, is things fall into a theme. It's wild. You have like, we just started dealing with this and we're not sure what to do. Okay, that's one kind of area. Then you have, we're still early in this process, but they went to treatment. I know how this works, and I feel like they're on the wrong track, or they've relapsed. That's another theme. Well, then we have the theme of it's escalated very quickly. This is dangerous. I know they're doing stuff that they could die from. That's a whole other theme. Then we have this has been going on forever. And all of those require different responses. But what our idea would be that if we start to answer those questions for one person, many times we can start to answer those questions for other people.
Will your workshops be centered on, like, topics?
What I used to do, and I'm open to doing it however you want. Y'all, who in here, by raising their hands, agreed to do the focus group? Did anybody sign up for it? You'll be asked these questions at the focus group. I'm open to doing it however. We're open to doing it however. How I used to do it was I would come to the group, Carolyn, and just say, like, what you got going on? Who's got one? And we would do like 2 or 3 cases. If nobody ever talks about the relapse situation, then I bring it up. But what I do is I go through it in much more detail. And I usually bring 2 or 3 coaches with me who are willing to kind of like...
I was thinking like they do breakout in the...
Well, what we do is we get the coaches there. We have like 7 coaches who've been trained specifically in family interventions. So we have them posted up, and they're like, you're going to go over here with Dory. You're going to go over here with Carol. Has anybody ever seen me do that? Has anyone been here since we've done that? We haven't done that since early on. Did you never even saw it? Oh, it's good. It really is good, because it really does give you a chance to get to your... Because the problem with this is you might not get to your individual thing. This gives you a chance to get to your individual thing. Now, I would argue that some of the stuff that I'm telling you guys, that it is, you can put it into practice. It is legit. You know, if you've come here before, you know that like, if you follow those simple rules and ideas on, look, I'm gonna talk about me. I'm gonna talk about how this impacts me. I'm gonna do it when I'm calm, right? I'm gonna try to change my patterns of behavior. If you start to do that stuff, you will start to impact change. What you might need is just a little bit more information on specifically, like, I got in a situation, guys, where we couldn't find a person. And some people in here have dealt with this before, where a person has gone off grid. This is a person not even from here. This is a person from Pennsylvania that I've known for 5 years. And maybe longer, actually, because I was there. Known 8 years, maybe. And that's a very specific way of going about it, right? That would be an example of what we would go through at the workshop. With the idea that obviously not everybody's dealing with, I haven't seen my 28-year-old for a while, but some people are dealing with a similar situation. We deal with how to handle like suicidal threats and what to do with that and how do you respond. So you'll get more questions about this and more information, and if you guys think it's worthwhile, then simply what we do is we pick a certain Saturday per month. I'm here usually 1 Saturday a month anyway, because I do all recovery. So we would just pick a Saturday and we would do it. And we usually have 20 people coming. It's not as big as this, but we usually have, you know, it's a great place to come. And here's the other thing. It really is a way to get the information from me. The other problem we have is that my phone number used to be on the front of the door. And now we are in, 7 hospitals, 4 locations in the upstate, and I'm just not available the way I was. So this is a way to get to me as well. But in the meantime, like, take everything I said tonight and understand, like, that is very, very, like, that's, put it into your data bank and put it into your situation and come back here next week and ask the follow-up questions. And say it didn't work or say it didn't. I'm telling you, we can't figure out exactly what you should do and guarantee everything is going to be all right, but we can guarantee you won't have to do it alone. And don't be afraid. And I can guarantee I will give you the information. There aren't too many people who know as much about this stuff as I do. I do not know how to change oil in the car. I could never hang a picture on a wall or paint a room. But I know and I suck at PowerPoint. But I do know my way around mental health and drug addiction. So you come, you ask these questions, and then you try to put them in practice, and really you ask yourself, what can I do? Where am I at in this situation? What can I say? What is my boundary? Not what is Rich's boundary, or not what does the world tell you to do. What is my particular boundary? And understand, we don't judge if you can't do it. You guys get that part? We do not judge for a minute if you cannot, like, quote unquote, kick the bum out, right? I don't believe in that. You'll get there. You'll get this figured out. So, good deal. It's already 5 after 8. I cannot believe it's 5 after 8. I swear I got the greatest job in the world. This is just like, an hour and a half just went by like that. We're done now. Let's close this thing with the Serenity Prayer. Taking a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members running through this no choice of their own. Followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, guys, thank you very much. We got some cards up here as well that have emergency availability if you have any additional questions.
Today.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.